Hello, my name is Ken Sandy. I am the author of The Influential Product Manager and product management professor or instructor at UC Berkeley. I'm here to talk to you today about stakeholder management, which is one of the most important skills that a product manager will have in their career, is how to manage their stakeholders, influencing them. We often call it managing or leading through influence. And of course, that really difficult task of when and how to say no, or saying no, but nicely. I'll start by talking about what is meant about influence. Influence goes beyond just getting people to act or behave a certain way in the work environment. Influence is about winning hearts and minds as well as their actions. It is about aligning beliefs, behaviors, actions, and the outcomes behind a common shared purpose. It is one of those things that takes a lifetime to really master. But when you think about it in terms of being able to align a team or a set of stakeholders behind that common shared purpose and really get everyone to believe in the outcomes you're trying to drive and the mission behind that, it becomes a lot easier. Influence is a much more effective and frankly enjoyable technique to master than what often happens in work environments, which is when you manage through authority. Authority is directly controlling actions through organizational seniority, someone who's maybe a higher up than you. Power of relationships, maybe somebody who has informal network or relationships within an organization. Apparent or real expertise, someone that's probably been there a long time and knows all about where the decisions and trade-offs have been made in the past, or have some expertise in how the organization actually functions, or my least favorite, a threat of consequences. Authority is using authority as a product manager is only better than using manipulation. Manipulation is something where you're basically convincing someone to do something that's primarily in your interest. It has no place in the workplace. When working with stakeholders, always try to focus on influence first. So I'm going to talk a little bit about tips for managing your stakeholders. I'm going to just talk briefly about 4 to 6 different tips, and then I'm going to illustrate different types of stakeholders that you might run into in your business life and how you can actually deal with, in particular, requests that they might be making of you. So first of all, I'll be talking about 6 communication and interaction techniques. These are building your relationships before you need them, seeking buy-in and practicing a no surprises policy, proactively delivering regular, concise updates, and always doing so by communicating the bottom line up front. Don't keep your stakeholders guessing where you're heading in your message. Be clear up front about what it is you want to say. Always also come with recommendations and options, and just be a low maintenance employee. Earn the trust. Don't try to make waves, and you'll become part of the inner circle. So let me talk about building relationships before you need them first. Obviously, building rapport with your direct manager and maybe other senior stakeholders is seen to be an absolute requirement in any young professional coming into the workplace, or frankly, for anyone who's starting in a new role. But often they also overlook the large number of team members around them, peers, and others who might be influential in their success in the organization, that they need to also build those relationships with. By only focusing on the organizational chart and who's above you, you're making a big mistake. You're really missing the opportunity to influence and also setting yourself up potentially for failure by not having the support network across an organization that you need. I like to think about building relationships before you need them as before needing somebody's help or assistance, actually having a rapport in place. It doesn't have to be a tight bond or anything, but just having an understanding of their roles, their goals, and how you might align or may not align, and being able to be in a position to reach out to them when you need help. Building that foundation first before that moment is super important. It's quite simple to think about building trust through this simple trust equation. Trust is the frequency of quality interaction plus your reliability that you will follow through on what you say you will do, minus your perceived self-interest. Let me break that down a little bit. Quality of interaction, you notice I'm not saying quantity, or I'm not saying that those have to be super, super deep interactions either. You don't have to be best friends, but simple little micro opportunities to reach out to people, to check in with them, to give them some positive reinforcement or feedback, or to ask them just how their weekend was. That can actually build a lot of trust over time by just giving those little tiny frequent but quality interactions with people. Obviously, meetings and one-to-ones are deeper engagements. They count as well. But don't expect to have a good trusting relationship by having one big long meeting where you might, or a lunch together, and then you haven't talked to them in a long, long time. So it really is about that pace and that frequency. Follow through is super important. And that can mean more often than not the little things mattering. When you don't follow through on, say, providing an email update by the deadline that you said you would do it, or completing a task by the time you said you would do it, or even if you're not going to be able to do that by the time you said, providing an update and acknowledging that you haven't forgotten about it and you're going to get to it, then you're not actually being very reliable, and that will really impact the trust that you build. And finally, self-interest should be self-evident, but one of the most subtle ways of actually detecting whether or not you are being self-interested in your relationship building is how much do you do the talking and how much do you do the talking about your world. Instead, asking questions, understanding and empathizing with the stakeholders and trying to have them do the talking more than you do is going to be far, far more powerful. I suggest you define your stakeholder group very broadly, as I mentioned before, not just the higher ups. When you start in an organization or a role, meet with them one-on-one, listen more, talk less, and be very deliberate in your stakeholder management strategy. List your stakeholders, determine the best way to actually talk to them and communicate with them on an ongoing basis. Some like email updates, some like water cooler talk, some don't want to be involved until there's a big problem and they need to be brought in. So try to understand their preferred method and frequency of communication. My second tip, seek buy-in and no surprises policy. If you think trying to seek buy-in from a range of stakeholders about the course of action that you're taking is very time-consuming, well, you're right, but it's far more time-consuming when you're trying to back out of a path that you're taking when you didn't have that alignment, and suddenly you're trying to get everyone aligned around something that you're already doing. Likewise, never surprise a stakeholder with a piece of information or data that will take them, will be something that maybe puts them on the spot or something that they didn't know. A good example of this is when you introduce a piece of information, maybe even bad news, in a meeting environment that really affects one of the stakeholders, and suddenly they're being asked to either explain it or to come up with plans to work around it. Instead, pre-wire your group consensus by previewing key points individually with stakeholders beforehand. That will allow you time for them to digest and get on side with, say, your point of view and to align with your course of action. If they don't, it will at least forewarn you of issues that might derail you later, so you can come in more prepared when you know that there may be a misalignment. And by sharing the uncomfortable early, it will be inevitable. You give an opportunity for the stakeholder to understand what recommendations and options that you have and get behind a course of action and even become an advocate for what you're planning. There is a saying that no news is good news. Well, I find that in a work environment, no news might be bad news. Generally, when you have a large silence around, say, an initiative or something that you are working on for a long period of time where you're not giving an update on where things are at, that might start worrying that stakeholder. They might be thinking maybe something isn't going well. So instead, build confidence, affirm the alignment, and engage the stakeholder by giving proactive, concise updates. By concise, I mean to make it clear and put the conclusions up front. Make sure it's clear on what the stakeholder needs to take away from what you're communicating, what their expected actions are, and whether or not you need their help. If you give them a long thing to read through, lots of data, lots of milestones, or worse, a lot of excuses, you're leaving them guessing and wondering whether or not there's something much bigger at work, and you're likely to actually cause them alarm rather than affirming that you got this. Establishing a good cadence and structure to your communications, like every Friday you can expect an update, means that they know to expect it. Or maybe there's a one-on-one that you're having on a regular basis, maybe weekly or bi-weekly. They know that that's where they're going to get this information. So reliably deliver proactively the updates on that cadence, and you'll get into a really good habit, yourself and your stakeholder. But of course, if an emergency arises, you need to nip that in the bud and communicate immediately. And start with that bottom line up front. We call it the bluff technique. Bottom line up front. Don't keep them guessing about where you're heading. Give them long, meandering communications. Be clear and concise upfront about what you want them to take away from your communication. And finally, own the solutions to the problems. Usually managers want you to feel confident that in addressing issues without involving them every single time. They may be happy to guide you, contribute to the team effort in resolving problems, and certainly intervene in high impact urgent issues, but they want to do all the thinking for you. So before escalating an issue, think about different solutions and own those as part of identifying potential resolutions to the problem. And certainly don't consistently go to your stakeholders with problems to solve that you haven't thought through yourself. And most of all, lots and lots of complaints that seem trivial or unnecessary or easily solved if you just talked one-on-one with the person that's causing you grief. We say a squeaky wheel gets the grease. That's not an attractive product manager trait. Again, providing options and a recommendation. The options give your stakeholders opportunities to engage on different paths of action, while the recommendation shows that you've already thought about what you would do if you were in their shoes. Allow them, of course, to choose a different option or come up with one of their own, but you've done the thinking and you've structured the thinking. Escalate judiciously. Be clear on the needed actions. Does this need to be escalated? Have I done everything that I can do before escalating it to a stakeholder? And generally, be a low maintenance employee. You'll earn trust by not complaining about everything or complaining or venting about team members. Obviously, there'll be times where you need to escalate an interpersonal issue, but make those really count by choosing the times when it's absolutely critical to get the work result that you're seeking. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 different stakeholders and give you just some examples of ways of engaging the different personalities that you might run into and what you can actually say in different circumstances. So particularly with senior colleagues, but also with peers, you want them to see you as supportive, aligned, and undemanding. You will be, however, in a situation where you need to challenge them sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. Other times you may not feel comfortable in doing it. You must have that healthy relationship in place and make sure that it is appropriate, but you must not shy away from confrontation when you believe an alternative path is the right thing for the customer and for the business. Importantly, do not fall into the trap where you're merely responding to stakeholder demands. This is called an order taker, where basically a stakeholder is telling you to do this, do this, do this, and you're basically taking them as tasks. You want to do your own critical thinking. So when you challenge others, it always helps by starting to reiterate the useful insights that they're bringing, where they're perhaps right, or the things that you are agreeing that you need to consider. And then you might ask them some questions that are indirectly challenging. So, for example, if a new idea is presented without context, maybe you can remind them that you already have objectives. Given that our objective for this quarter is X, how does your idea help us achieve X? Or if an idea is presented without any data, you can ask, what data might be able to gather that is the correct path to take? Ask them what data they may have or what data you might need to gather. And sometimes offering a trade-off is the simplest path. Thanks for the idea. Compared to our existing products A and B, help me with why we should prioritize this new thing higher than the things we've already decided on. Or simply ask them to walk you through their thinking. And a really clever way of doing that is to remind them that you actually have to advocate for any course of action. So you need to be able to repeat that context to the team at large. Or maybe you have data they don't. So share that. Here's the data I see. What am I missing? Here's some examples of actual stakeholders that I've run into. Their archetypes, the names have been changed to protect the guilty. This is no-nonsense Nancy. Her habitat. She's often found with senior executive titles and corner office. Very senior in an organization. Tends to set deadlines or scope or both. This is what I want when I want it. Presents issues in terms of solutions, not problems. May have already decided that this is what I want to address the problem, but then forgets to even describe what the problem is. And in some cases may see a product management organization as simply a service organization to do the bidding of them or the rest of the organization. A good strategy is to respect their authority. Acknowledge that. There's various ways you can do that, but certainly being deferential and not immediately confrontational is important. Bring the conversation back to the desired outcomes they're trying to achieve. There's always a reason why no-nonsense Nancy is giving you a directive. What is the outcome that they're trying to actually achieve? When you know that, you can backtrack to the underlying problems that may actually need to be solved. And then commit to doing discovery and data gathering to confirm that it is the right problem to solve, or that you've truly understood the scope of the problem and that is the right solution to address. Sometimes they'll resist that. Other times they'll be willing to give you some limited amount of time to really dig in to understand and confirm that the problem actually exists. And make sure they understand the impact and resulting trade-offs that would be required to achieve their objective. Otherwise, they will think they can just add and add and add things to your list of things to do. There are always trade-offs. Make sure they understand what won't get done as a result of the new ask. And here's a really great question to ask them when you're presented with a new initiative in this from No Nonsense Nancy. I can see this is important to you. Help me understand the underlying data and drivers that have led you to this conclusion so I can efficiently guide the team. You'll notice I've respected the authority. I've reminded her of the importance of the data and underlying outcomes and understanding those. And I've given a reason why I need to know that, so I can actually support and advocate that with the rest of the team. Let's look at stakeholder number 2, Likeable Larry. His habitat, he's usually a long-term, well-respected resident of many departments, usually someone who is very friendly, always wants to help out, takes lots of customer requests, always wanting to sort of try to make the team and the customer happy. Usually, because they have really great friendly relationships, They approach the team very directly. They lack process. They don't necessarily write out a requirements form or anything. They just go directly to the nearest engineer and say, can you help me with this? The team, because they like Larry, desire and feel responsible to help. And the result is these distractions might lead to missed milestones in the things you've already committed without you even knowing that it's distracting the team. The strategy: listen and acknowledge their needs. Then describe the impact on others in the organization when you miss the goals because potentially of pursuing their requests over the things you've already described. Maybe put their need into an idea backlog to show that you have definitely noted their ask, and it will be prioritized at the appropriate level. Often that just does the trick. And when they understand that maybe you can't address their need, recruit them to cheerlead the existing goals. Get them to engage the team. Use that likable character to really egg the team on and motivate them. Here's an example. The team has been pretty hammered lately, striving for goal X. We may not be able to work on what you're asking for, but can you drop by and acknowledge their hard work? And here's stakeholder 3, Recency Ralph. He's a rarely cited sales executive, except immediately after an important customer meeting has concluded. Usually they're out in the field talking to lots of customers, but you can be sure that whatever has come up in that meeting now becomes the requests that they're coming back for you in the product team that are all must-haves to win an important deal. These things tend to come out of left field. They're high urgency. Usually, at least there's a perception that a big deal or a massive problem has been identified that needs immediate attention. And if you just simply ignore that, it just gets escalated and eventually comes back down to you as work that is must-have anyway. So you want to intercept Recency Ralph. First of all, understand the context. These will almost always will be in the form of solutions based on that last customer interaction. So use 5 whys techniques by asking sort of why 5 times until you really get to the root cause issue of what is the customer really trying to address? What are the problems? And that will help you potentially evaluate potential workarounds. If possible, you might be able to suggest right there a workaround that's an alternative course with lower effort. Reiterate the value of the work already prioritized, reminding them again of the things that they've probably been asking for in the past that will now potentially be delayed if you chase this new list, and remind them of the outcomes that you're already trying to drive on their behalf. As soon as they understand the trade-offs and what might actually slip, you might find that they agree, keep doing what you're doing. And if that doesn't work, engage them in the prioritization process. Show them how the criteria by which work is prioritized and how it needs to conform to that. And then you might just be able to say no nicely because the criteria show that it just won't move the dial like the other things you've already prioritized. And here's a great question to ask Recency Ralph. Can you tell me about a time that you or your customer wanted that thing you just asked for? And what did you do instead at the time? There's always been a workaround to this problem that's now coming up. Almost always, it's not new. They must have dealt with it before. Try to figure out how they dealt with before and see if that's actually the answer to the problem. And that's it for my managing stakeholders talk. I would like you all also to be aware of much more tips and tricks in my book, The Influential Product Manager, How to Lead and Launch Successful Technology Products. It's a really practical book to really help you apply influential techniques with stakeholders, with teams, with your customers throughout the product lifecycle. Right now it's on sale. Here's an Amazon link. You can also contact me at any of those URLs if you wish to either link with me on LinkedIn or ask me a question by emailing me, or indeed you can order a PDF version of the book by emailing me, or if you want to check out some more resources at influentialpm.com. Thank you very much.